On a gloomy morning in 1520, the sailors waiting on the deck of Ferdinand Magellan's ship San Antonio could not believe what they saw on the shore. There, dancing on the sand, was a creature, so immense in height, in shadow, in presence, that according to Magellan's own recorded notes, a sailor could barely reach its waist. No one could speak. No one could move. Because this was not simply a large human being. This was the living proof of a truth that history has worked so hard to erase, that books were mobilized to burn, that museums locked away in their vaults. And what I am about to tell you today is not just that these giants existed, but that they were defeated, destroyed, and erased in the greatest power struggle in the history of the world. Are you ready? Because official history is hiding the answer to this question from you. Let's begin. Patagonia. The most desolate, most savage, most untouched corner of South America. If you went there today, you would see nothing but wind and stone. But every European explorer who set foot on those lands in the 1500s wrote the same thing in their journals: giants. Magellan's secretary Antonio Pigafetta described these beings as so tall that we could barely reach their waist. The crew of Francis Drake saw them. Sir Francis Fletcher recorded them in his notes. Then another, then another. Dozens of different explorers, across dozens of different centuries, all telling the same story. So why have you never heard this name? Why are these giants absent from textbooks? Why has no one ever told you? The answer is hidden somewhere far darker than you might think. In 1845 in Tennessee, in 1856 in Iowa, and then across dozens of different states throughout North America, archaeologists unearthed giant skeletons. Some exceeded 2.5 meters in height. Some had skull structures that matched no known human species. Newspapers ran headlines. Scientists were thrilled. And then, what happened? The Smithsonian Institution stepped in. The bones were collected for examination and never saw the light of day again. Forbidden! That single word was stamped like a seal over dozens of reports, dozens of skeletal discoveries. The Tennessee giants were gone. The Iowa giants were gone. And before long, the Patagonian giants would be gone too. But why? Who could have organized an operation this enormous? And why would anyone do such a thing? Tartaria. If you have heard this name before, you are already questioning what official history has been hiding from you. If you haven't, know this. Listed in the 18th century Britannica Encyclopedia as the largest empire in the world, this colossal structure does not appear in a single textbook today. A civilization stretching from Siberia to Central Asia and deep into Russia, with its own architecture, its own technology, its own symbols. And sources now make it increasingly clear that Tartaria was not limited to Eurasia. Their trade routes, networks of power, and military campaigns crossed oceans. South America was not a border for them. It was a target. And the giants of Patagonia stood as the only obstacle in the path of that target. Now think. On one side, a race of giants who had lived on those lands for thousands of years, integrated with nature through their very size, having built their own civilization, their own order. On the other, a global power that wove the world into a net, built new cities over the civilizations it reset, and rewrote history in its own favor. These two forces fought the greatest and most silent war in history at the beginning of the 1800s. Silent, because the victors destroyed every record. But traces remained. Traces always remain. And they never truly disappear. The first of those traces begins in the year 1816, during what is known as the Year Without a Summer. A sudden and inexplicable climate catastrophe struck the entire world. Snow fell in Europe in July. Harvests were completely destroyed across North America. And in the southern reaches of South America, on the Patagonian steppes, silence. The trails of the nomads vanished. Campsites said to belong to the giants were abandoned. Official history explains this through the effects of a volcanic eruption. But you already know which stories official history specializes in burying. And this is precisely where the Mudflood theory enters the picture. Across the entire world, the first floors of cities lie buried beneath the earth. Windows sit below street level. Buildings look as though they were pulled out from inside a wave of mud. This is not only in Europe, not only in Asia, it is the same in South America. In certain regions of Patagonia, indigenous oral traditions still speak of the great men beneath the ground. So what about that mud? That sudden global destruction? Who created it? Who wielded it? And who survived? And who was erased? The answer is slowly taking shape. Tartaria's final great move was not merely a military conquest. It was a systematic erasure operation. First war, then catastrophe, then the writing of history. In the early 1800s, libraries were burned across the globe. Documents written in older languages were destroyed under the pretense of being incomprehensible. Access to books predating 1800 was progressively restricted. And throughout this process, every trace of the giant presence in South America, Magellan's original notes, Pigafetta's complete journals, the references within the oral histories of indigenous tribes, was systematically eliminated one by one or shelved under the label of mythology. But Magellan's notes could not be completely destroyed. Drake's journals could not be entirely erased. And most importantly, the memory of indigenous peoples could not be locked inside an archive vault. The Tehuelche people, in stories passed down from generation to generation, still speak of their great ancestors. In certain caves in southern Argentina, handprints pressed into rock surfaces sit far beyond the reach of any ordinary human hand. No one explains them. No one wants to explain them. Because as long as these traces remain in place, they threaten the greatest lie of official history. And now, when you bring it all together, the picture becomes clear. The Patagonian giants lived on these lands for thousands of years. They built their own civilization, established their own order. When Tartaria moved to expand its global network of power towards South America, these giants were the only point of independent resistance. The war began. The natural disasters of the early 1800s were the cover for this war. The giants were defeated, and then history was rewritten. The victors always write history. We know this. But what the victors did after writing history reveals the true matter, erasing the losers from memory as well. Killing them is not enough. They must be made to appear as though they never existed. And they did it, or so they believed. That is why the Patagonian giants are absent from textbooks. That is why those skeletons disappeared inside museum vaults. That is why Magellan's notes were buried in archives as exaggerated travelers' tales. And that is why you, until today, had never heard the name of this war. But now you have. And once you hear it, when you look around you, you begin to see the evidence everywhere. Windows beneath pavements, unexplained handprints, hundreds of testimonies stamped with the label of mythology, destroyed libraries, bones locked in vaults. These are not coincidences. These are the traces left behind by the losing side. And those traces are still out there, waiting for you. Because the truth never disappears, and sooner or later, it always comes to light.